Hey, this is Clint, and I wanted to talk about Taoist wizardry, Taoist magic. Usually talk about a lot of Western systems of mysticism and Hermetics, magic, integral theory. But today I wanted to spend a little bit of time on Taoism. I originally got into Eastern mysticism just more as a meditation and just kind of general good philosophy of kind of going with the flow, especially with Taoism, which is all about Wu Wei, the principle of least effort, surrendering, allowing, letting be, not really going against the current, kind of going with the current, going with nature, as if there's just this inherent force, the Tao, that can't really be named, but it's there, and you can kind of go with it or you cannot go with it. But, anyways, in this context, I was going to mention Taoism in terms of some of the more magical things that have arisen out of one particular school. And I put in the subject heading Levitation, Invisibility, Philosopher's Stone, and all that stuff's included in this really interesting book called Opening the Dragon Gate. It's translated by Thomas Cleary, an American scholar of East Asian languages, but it's basically written by the students of a teacher, Wang Leping, and it's about the teacher Wang Leping's own journey and own process of being initiated into this school of Taoist wizardry. And so it's all told in a narrative, and it's interesting because the narrative kind of keeps you interested that way, but goes into enough detail to where you could replicate these exercises yourself. And doesn't necessarily go all the way and about all of his life, but definitely probably like, let's just say the first half of the bulk of his training it goes into. And he starts at a real young age, I think like 10, 11, 12, something like that. And these three old sages choose him and take him with them to train. And in the beginning, it's real interesting. One of the things they do is they put him in the shed, and the shed is completely dark. And he basically sits in this dark shed for like 4 hours a day. And he kind of starts to organically come to different realizations and different thoughts and learn how to still his mind. And all these things kind of just naturally happen with him. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, they chose him supposedly, I think, based on astrology or a vision of where, their new disciple was going to come from. But obviously, this kid had a natural predisposition to mysticism. So sticking him in this dark shed for 4 hours every single day when he's, real young, kind of naturally leads him to certain places. The other thing that was big in his training, too, was building chi. And a lot of the building of the chi was probably some of the exercises that might be similar to like Tai Chi or Qigong, but it was just really a lot of squats, a lot of what we would just kind of call leg presses or squats, bending down and back up. And he would do this. This is in the mountains in the Himalayas. He would do this up against a tree and go for a long, long time, doing these squats against this tree just over and over and over and over. And I think, he would have his hands on the bark of the tree or just right parallel to the bark. So, like, as he was going up and down, he kind of had to keep, with a straight back, had to keep facing the tree. And I think it had something to do with like the tree's energy too, that he was feeding off of while he was doing it. It's been a few years since I read this book, but I'm doing a video on it because it's one of the few books, like the other book I talk about a lot, or the books of Franz Bardon, especially Initiation into Hermetics. This is another one of those special books where they there's a lot of extensive detail about the exercises and the training of this kind of magical school to develop capacities that some might say are a little bit paranormal or supernatural to some degree, or at least make it start to seem like, okay, the wizards and magicians of old aren't all just exaggeration. That's not all just a metaphor. Some of this stuff's really going on. Because the old sages that train Wang Leping in this book, at one point they're playing hide and seek in the cemetery, and Wang Leping's a kid, and he's counting and closes his eyes, and then like he opens his eyes and he can't find any of them. But apparently it's because they all disappeared. They all had the ability to make themselves invisible. And again, this is a real story. This is, the real training of somebody that's alive today. So it's not all, this isn't some fantasy fiction novel. Supposedly, this is exactly how his training happened, more or less. And the other thing, levitation, they do talk about levitation. It's very similar to the Western magician Franz Bardon, where, on the one hand, there's an aspect of the elements and just making yourself into the air element and getting so full of the air element, you can make your body lighter, and that'll obviously make you, kind of rise up. You get so light, and then you can make your body heavier too with working with the elements like this. But really, the Taoists, I think their philosophy is more focused on qi, and it's really all about building and manipulating qi. At least that kind of seems to be their starting point, and perhaps raising the body with qi rather than with your muscles, which again could be similar to Bardon's technique of kind of lifting your physical body with your astral body rather than your muscles that he goes on in Initiation into Hermetics. But, the training exercises that this Taoist kid does that eventually becomes a master himself, very, very extensive, all the time, every day. It's not like this was, I think he did go to school in the beginning, and then he came home after school, and so he stayed in school for some ways, but eventually it became a full-time job. But they went around begging. They didn't really interface with society a whole lot. They'd walk around the mountains, and they'd basically live on nuts and berries. They really wouldn't eat that much, and they would just do lots and lots of walking in nature. So, yeah, it's interesting, that some of the core things that were their foundational training for magic in this book. And I'm going to put a link below if you're interested in the book. It's a lengthy book, but, if you don't get it, I'm trying to give you some of the nuggets and takeaways here. But, some of the core things, very simple things that anybody could do. Really just kind of sitting in a dark room for long periods of time. And it wasn't really a dark room inside, it was a shed outside in the mountains. So, that's kind of a little bit different aspect. But I think he did that like 4 hours a day, every day for like at least the first year. And then just a lot of chi, a lot of lower body strength building exercises. Of course, it's not like, the American athlete that's, real big and buff and but wouldn't want to meditate because, that's for pussies or whatever. These guys have both, masculine and feminine. And obviously this kid has a big predisposition to mysticism. And so he's kind of developing his sensitivity and his openness and consciousness along with just a really powerful kind of chi force through a lot of these lower body exercises, which is, again, mainly it's just squats. It's just the good old leg press, basically, that they're doing. But they're doing vast quantities And they're always doing it outside in nature. And while they're doing it in nature, there's always some sort of mental engagement with the natural landscape. I mean, it's not just like a mechanical, physical thing. If he's putting his hands up next to a tree, it's kind of feeling the tree's energy and taking in the tree's energy. I mean, there's a whole kind of imaginative, natural, synergistic, energetic connection they have with nature. And then with in Hermetics, they'll talk about the micro and the macro, as above, so below. These guys take that to this very, very extensively detailed length, and there's some acupuncturists in their schools that have the entire, I mean, it's more than just the meridians, they might have now. I mean, they have a whole lot drawn out. But anyways, the idea is the body is a microcosm of the planet Earth. And this matches up literally. But to find out where, like, your kind of, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, for example, they would take somebody there and they would say, well, where is the equivalent on their body of the Middle East or the Persian Gulf, where there's lots of oil, where it's a rich resource, that's constantly being mined. And to find out how their own body matched up to the earth would depend on what time you were born, what year you were born, the astrological aspects, and actually the physical location too of where you were born. I guess that's the astrological aspects too. But, somebody born in one year in America and another year in China, or just Eastern or Western hemispheres for that matter, would totally turn the whole thing around. And anyways, real interesting, and they were like, everybody's got their own Bermuda Triangle on some place in their body, depending on their astrological sign, depending on where they were born. They had a system of figuring out where's your Bermuda Triangle, where there's just some sort of weakness, like your Achilles heel. Things just seem to disappear, and that really interesting stuff. And the other thing is the Philosopher's Stone. Because the Philosopher's Stone, a lot of times in the West with these archetypal psychologists, it's seen as this kind of metaphorical system of integrating different aspects of your being to have some sort of spiritual, unitive, inner enlightenment, so to speak. But this is taken very literally in this book. They have a liquid, and it's a yellow liquid, and they drink the elixir. And there are monks in the Himalayas or hermits mixing this yellow elixir. And at one point, Wang Leping, it's like, he's trained enough. And they don't give out the elixir until somebody's done an extensive amount of training, because they say the normal person, it would just kill them, which actually does match up to some science and historical research about Taoist monks drinking mercury and getting poisoning and dying. So it's kind of interesting how that matches up, because they say a lot of people have drank this and died because they're not really meant for it. So Wang Leping has to do a certain amount of training, and then he goes up. The monks, the old sages, take him up there, and he drinks the yellow liquid. And I think the first time he does die, or he goes into like a coma for a day. But I guess his soul, or, and remember, this is the East, so they have a little bit of a different system. But it's three-part. It's three-part, just like Bardon's is three parts, physical, astral, spiritual. They have the kind of the lower, the middle, the upper, or whatnot. But I mean, it's a system of three. It matches up. A lot of it matches up fairly well with a lot of Bardon's stuff, and a lot of Bardon's stuff with the positive and negative and the different parts of the body, again, surprisingly matches up pretty well with some of this stuff too. So that is real interesting. But anyways, he takes the Philosopher's Stone, and I guess he goes to the world beyond and meets some of his ancestors, and then comes back a day later, wakes up in the mountains, boom. oh wow, that was some strong stuff. I went to heaven and came back, and oh, it's been a whole day. And that was just the first time. And then there's one time later where he takes it, and I think he's in a coma for like 2 weeks, or almost like seems like he's dead, and his heart stopped. I think at one time for like a full day or something, his heart stopped. Like I guess he would be physically dead, but the Taoist sages know that he's not. It's not completely a lost cause, and they do some ceremonies, and they kind of get his soul back into his body, and he's back, pops back in, and he's okay. So yeah, it's an elixir of life, and it's real strong, and it's supposed to, the idea is not to just die and have a near death experience and come back. I mean, I think there's a whole idea that it's supposed to completely clean you out. It's a cleansing agent, and it cleanses you out of everything. So I think there's some stages you go through of profuse sweating, et cetera, and then eventually you're out. Um, so that's interesting. Philosopher's Stone, levitation, invisibility, all sorts of interesting abilities that these guys start to develop. And they give a lot of the foundational exercises in this book. Again, it's Opening the Dragon Gate, translated by Thomas Cleary. And if you don't read it, I'm trying to summarize the main points. But just very, very fascinating, because some of the foundational exercises, it's not necessarily that they're so complicated or so like bizarre. It's just there's an extensive um, quantity to how much they do them. They do them a lot. Like I said, he was in the dark shed for 4 hours. A lot of the chi exercises and the squats go on for hours and hours. It's not like a quick workout at the gym. So, some really interesting stuff. Hope you may check it out. At the least, I think it's great because we kind of have another book that's kind of gives Bardon some cred, and Hermetics some good cred, and matches up a little bit, and kind of shows that okay, we're not totally crazy. Apparently there's some people that are really, really doing this, and apparently a lot of them are in the Himalayas. They're not on YouTube or on a reality show, or David Blaine's Street Magic. Nothing against David Blaine, just saying it's a different kind of thing, I think. And there's probably some sort of concern about coming forward. I think that, and I'm glad I actually brought that up, because the only reason I think they said that they were telling this story now is because it was in a time in the world where these old ways needed to come out and become more public, and these teachings needed to be more available. So there's this kind of 2012 New Age, a little bit philosophy of, oh, we are in a very, dangerous, difficult time on the planet, and we need to get all these old mystical teachings out there, which I love that. I mean, indigenous teachers from all over the planet are doing that right now, and that's great. And the Taoists have given us a great gift. Thank you, Taoist brothers and sisters, and thanks for watching my video, and I'll see you in the next one.